on good news and spiritual enlightenment. My next author, Dr. Steve Taubman, he's got a new book called Buddha in the Trenches, The Timeless System for Developing Unshakable Performance Under Pressure. God, that's so true, right? Because just when I think I've got all of my, spiritual enlightenment tools, I get tested by the universe and during a stressful situation and they all go out the window. Dr. Steve, welcome to my show.
Thanks for having me, Jenny. You made me think of my favorite mantra. You got to get this. You just repeat after me. I'm going to die.
I'm going to die.
With a smile.
With a smile?
If it kills me.
It kills me. I kind of really love that. Thank you. So how
You're
did
welcome.
you go from being a chiropractor to being an empowerment expert? But yeah, that doesn't feel like that far of a stretch for me because I know chiropractors and they're all very spiritual. But for you, how did you get there?
Yeah, well, for me, it was kind of a meandering path because I was a chiropractor. And then during the course of my practice, I started learning how to do magic. And I started doing magic for my patients. The reason I started doing magic was because I had just gotten out of a relationship and I needed something to do with my hands.
So you're also funny, too.
So I started doing magic and I was entertaining people. And eventually I ended up selling my practice, becoming a magician. And then I traveled for about a year. I learned stage hypnosis, became a stage hypnotist. And in the middle of doing my stage hypnosis work, I was the official hypnotist for MTV Spring Break years ago, and I had an experience with one of my routines on stage, where I had somebody on stage think they were stuck behind an invisible wall. It was a really cool thing. It was kind of a shocking, funny thing that happened, and it made me realize this idea that we're all kind of stuck behind invisible walls. We all have a place we want to go, a hope, a dream, a desire, but we get stuck behind it. So I started applying my mindfulness practices to helping people to remove barriers to success.
That's amazing analogy. An invisible wall. It's all of our blockages that we can't see, but we know are there, and we're always trying to get on the other side of it.
And you know what the funny thing about that is that pushing against those blocks never works. What works is waking up. Right, and that's why mindfulness is so important. You know, I took on the challenge of mindfulness for myself originally because I was a neurotic mess. Like, I grew up in a dysfunctional family. I was bullied as a kid. I had a lot of mental, emotional scars, and in fact, one of the few respites for me back, in those days was my grandma Flo, who was like this wonderful, loving woman who made me feel good about myself. And actually, because I know you want to talk about procrastination, and this is kind of a story that goes to the whole procrastination thing if you want to hear it.
Sure.
Cool. So what happened for me was that my grandmother was really remarkable. First of all, she was very funny, and she kind of had a funny voice. She kind of sounded like a cross between Groucho Marx and Bugs Bunny. So she had this delightful sounding voice, and she was very quick-witted. And as she got older, I realized I wanted to cherish that voice forever. I wanted to remember her voice. And so I told myself I was going to record her voice. And I kept procrastinating about bringing over a tape recorder. And eventually it was too late. And one day, far too soon, she passed away. And I've been whenever I think about it, it gives me a really bad feeling. I feel really bad about having let it go. And really, we're all, constantly sabotaging ourselves by procrastinating about things that we may later regret.
So true.
Right? We want to do something, but we don't get around doing it. And it turns out in my research for my procrastination course that people are procrastinators don't live as long. They're less healthy. They have worse relationships. Their self-esteem is lower, and they walk around with regrets. So there are a lot of reasons not to procrastinate.
Is procrastination, though, part of ego's clever disguise, one of their many disguises?
I love that you said that because, a lot of times we'll say your ego will always try to convince you that whatever you're thinking is vitally important. Right? So the ego is this part of our consciousness that we take to be ourselves. And because we're so caught up in thinking that we are the voices in our head, then our thoughts form an unbroken fabric that we take to be our own identity. And so, yes, procrastination is one of those things. It's actually many of those things because in my research, I've discovered 8 things that cause people to procrastinate, that are all of which relate to their level of consciousness around it. So in other words, if you were awake, if you were aware of why you were procrastinating, you wouldn't do it.
Correct.
But it's happening in the shadows. Your ego has convinced you that you need to procrastinate for one of those 8 reasons.
I was going to say, like, if you're awake, then you're aware that it's your ego that's tricking you.
Yeah, exactly. Then it's like, oh, I see what you're doing here. I get it.
Totally. I've taught Evan that from an early age, which I can say is one of the only things I'm really proud of in my life.
Yeah, the rest of your life has been a complete waste.
From an early on, that voice is not his thoughts aren't him, So he's been able to separate those, which has been incredibly powerful for him. But let's talk about those different states of consciousness. So for the people that aren't awake 24 hours a day, unless you're Eckhart Tolle, it's really hard. So how can you figure out that it's procrastination, that it's ego, if you're not necessarily a fully awake person?
Well, the practices of being fully awake are kind of your prerequisite anyway, right?
Got it.
So the first step in becoming awake is realizing you're not awake. That's the part that trips most people up, because people say, I'm awake, I'm fine, I could see what's going on around me. But people don't realize the extent to which they're still asleep. We do know that we spend about 60% of our day in a trance, kind of in a brain fog, and we're on automatic a lot of the time.
100%. Like you find yourself going to Facebook, then Instagram, then checking your email, then Facebook, then Instagram. That's procrastination. That is. Yeah, it is,
because, and again, we're terrified of silence. One of the reasons we don't wake up is because we can't handle the idea of having an empty mind. So we got to fill it up with the next thing, whether it's something that we're preoccupied with, it's our to-do list, it's Facebook, it's our phone, or it's just the next shiny object.
Why is silence? Why are people so scared of it?
I purposely just did that.
I know. That's why I didn't.
I know. Okay. Why are we afraid of it? Because we take comfort in the never-ending play of our egos. Our ego is really designed to create survival. It's our survival mechanism. We think we need to think our way through every moment of our lives, otherwise we will die. And so there's an inherent angst, an inherent sense of discomfort that comes from moments of silence. And because we're not used to it, and because we don't recognize the value of it, we instantly jump into some distracting activity. When what we do know, what you and I know, Jenny, from having slogged up that hill a little bit, is that when you start to employ silence into your life, when you start to integrate silence into your life, you're happier, you're healthier, you're more compassionate, you're more patient, you have a better sense of humor. Because humor, just like you say in your song, just because you're spiritual doesn't mean you're not hysterical.
And it's peaceful. Like I remember when I had the fortunate pleasure of having dinner with Eckhart Tolle, not to be told name dropper, but I just want to explain the moment. But I said to him back, and this was like 10 years ago, I said, why do I feel like I'm on this roller coaster where I'm like all of a sudden like really awake, really like I go through 3 months and I feel like this spiritual warrior that can just, what it reminds me of? The Matrix. Remember when the guy bent backwards with the bullets?
Totally, yes.
That's how I felt with anything coming my way. Nothing hit me. I realized things would go past me. I go, that doesn't belong to me. It belongs to them. Like everything was like amazing. And then all of a sudden I'd either meet somebody or something would happen and I'd crash and I'd be asleep for another 2 years. And
yeah, well, what it ultimately comes down to, and I love your bullet analogy, because the first chapter of Buddha in the Trenches talks about being bulletproof. It's like if you were Superman, the bullets would just bounce off, right? And then you would laugh at the bullets as they came at you because they're not having any impact.
That's so true. Right. And then you have to
but going back to your point, is that what it really comes down to in our quest to be centered and masterful in the way that you were when you were in the Matrix, or out of the Matrix, so to speak, is it's necessary strength. Right? It's necessary strength. Are you strong enough to not to resist the lure of your ego, the lure of the drama of your life? Because when it starts to get you, it starts to pull you down, and it starts to become less. You become less and less capable of responding to the experiences you're having, just because you're emotionally exhausted.
That's so
Does that make
true.
sense?
100% true.
Yeah.
And then you add some post-traumatic stress in there from either your core trauma in your childhood.
Yeah.
That you
Bringing all that with you. And because it's got such mastery over you for so long, it's like, Ram Dass, right? Ram Dass, he said, I went to India. I spent 3 months learning how to be centered, and I came home, and my father picked me up at the airport, and it took him 30 seconds to bring me right back down to earth. Right? So it's those old triggers that usually get us, or the things that resemble the old triggers.
Do you have tips for, let me plug the book again so we can keep selling books. The book is called Buddha in the Trenches, the Timeless System for Developing Unshakable Performance Under Pressure. Do you have tips on how people can monitor, if you're actually monitoring your thinking, you're already practicing presence and awakeness, if that's a word, but other tips to get people to snap out of it that you've discovered?
Yeah, actually, sometimes it's like with every forget is a remember, and what I mean by that is, if you start to fall into unconsciousness, the very symptoms that arise when you fall into unconsciousness are things like depression, anxiety, irritation, frustration, anxiety, all that stuff. That's the stuff that slaps you in the face and reminds you that you're not awake. Right? Yeah. So if you could take a lesson from the negative experience, then it could become a positive experience.
That's so true. That's really good advice.
And here's a simple way that you can do that. I talk about this in the book. I call it piercing. So piercing is a really interesting technique, and it's powerful because in any one given moment, things can happen in your life that can just absolutely piss you off, and you're off the deep end. So it's kind of a 5-step process. And the first step is that when you find yourself in a situation that triggers you, whether it's somebody who aggravated you or people cut you off in traffic or just something that you're not able to overcome, you get in that situation. The first thing you need to do is to remove yourself from the situation to the best of your ability. Now, that could just mean I'm going to the bathroom. Or it could mean I'm going to close my eyes and shut out the world for a moment. But you have to remove yourself just far enough that you're no longer at the effect of that thing, that it's not still bombarding you. The bullets aren't still flying.
So true.
And then the second step is, as quickly as possible, is to migrate your attention from the thoughts to the sensations. So in other words, I'm thinking about all the things that Jenny did to aggravate me, but now I'm going to notice what it feels like inside of my body because of Jenny aggravating me. And so I've now shifted my consciousness into an inner and say, by the way, you're not aggravating me.
I know. That's a good example,
so the third step is to focus your attention on the area within that is with the strongest sensation. Where do you feel it the most in your body? Stomach, your throat, your face, where are you feeling it inside of you? And then the fourth step is to detach from the trigger. And what that means is that rather than me being aggravated by some kind of external event, it's really just a sensation in my body. It might as well have just been injected into me with a hypodermic needle. It's just a feeling. It's a sensation. And then the fifth part is that I now befriend the feeling. I befriend the sensation. I breathe into it. I become present to it. I allow myself to be with it and allow it to begin to dissolve of its own accord. And in my experience, that works reliably in almost every situation. And if it doesn't, it's only because I don't yet have the necessary strength for that situation.
Wow. That's really good. Let me give you a scenario, and then you can kind of help me out from there. So let's say a female is working in a office complex, and there's cubicles everywhere, and there's a guy that's constantly kind of, sexually making her feel less than, women belong in the kitchen, but it's also her boss. And it infuriates her. So she runs to the bathroom. She connects with that feeling. Is there a time, though, and a place where she can use that energy, that anger, to stand up for herself? Or how does she transform? That's a great question.
I get that question a lot because people misunderstand the idea of acceptance or dealing with the aversion of a situation. They mistake that for passivity, like I'm not going to do anything about this situation. And what you're saying is that the anger, the feeling, is it could potentially be a motivator. It could actually get you off your butt and make you do whatever it is that you need to do, whether it's, to go to somebody in the higher up, or to confront your boss directly, or to quit and, like you say, sage the place and move to Chicago or whatever. There may be an action necessary to rectify the situation, but the work I'm talking about is they're not mutually exclusive. In other words, if you do the work to be able to get rid of the unbalanced energy inside of you that's been triggered by this event, it doesn't mean you'll then go back and keep on experiencing that event endlessly. What it means is you'll probably be a little bit more creative and a little bit more courageous about how to deal with the situation. Because you're not, you know what it's like when you're so upset about something that you can't stand up for yourself?
Right.
Right? This is the remedy for that. This is, first I'm going to get to where I've got my power back, and then I'm going to figure out what I need to do about the situation.
You're right. Probably coming at it from a completely more logical, smarter point of view.
Exactly. Totally.
That makes so much sense. I know that they're waving at me. Dr. Steve Taubman, this is awesome. I loved talking to you. I hope you come back on my show, and I can feel people already online buying the book. It's called Buddha in the Trenches.
And I put a special gift on my website for you, Jenny. On the top of in my menu bar, there's a thing that says Jenny McCarthy gift. So if anybody wants to get a free few chapters of the book, they can get it, and also access to my mindfulness quiz. What is your website? SteveTaubman.com. Steve, TAUBMAN.com. And you'll see the Jenny McCarthy gift up top. Buddha in the Trenches. Thank you for that. I really appreciate your time and your help today. I feel much better now, Steve. Thank you. Talk to you soon, Doctor. Bye, Jenny. Bye, hun. We'll be right back, guys. Focus on me. Focus on me. Focus on me.